the recording starting again.
Is started.
All right, well, welcome back from your break. So we've covered the key principles and issues, and now we're getting into one of my absolute favorite topics to talk about. And I think a topic which will address a lot of the issues that came up in our discussion afterwards about implementing AAC in the classroom. And that's talking about descriptive talking, teaching, and testing. This notion of descriptive teaching has been around since I started the field in 1977. In 1977, that was before any speech generating devices were available to our field. It was before even any kind of electronic scanners were available in our field. And descriptive teaching, when I was going through my educational training, my pre-service training at the University of Wisconsin, as well as my immediate experience when I came out and started working in a school for special needs children, it was something that we just all did. It was considered fairly standard practice because we were all working in a manual communication board environment. And the average manual communication board, if it was on a child's lap tray, if it was a young child, and they were in an elementary school program, so they're a small child, small wheelchair, small lap tray, the average size of a lap tray was roughly 12 to 14 inches across, and maybe as far as the kid could reach on the lap tray was about 10 inches. So you had that little limited geography there where you put a manual board. And when you ran out of space with that board, you added another section or you made communication books. We were in this world of limited geography to work with, limited space, which meant limited amount of vocabulary. And what we were all doing wasn't called at the time descriptive teaching. Now, descriptive teaching is a phrase that you might have already heard thrown around in our field. But what we were doing in the 1970s was something that was called vocabulary extension. And again, my mentors, I always want to give the credit to the people upon whose shoulders I stood. When I was a undergraduate and graduate at the University of Wisconsin, Greg Vanderheiden, who taught the first ever course in AAC, introduced me to the concept of vocabulary extension strategies. So I was taught when you don't have enough word device or board and the person isn't able to spell the word they want, here are some strategies you can use to communicate those additional ideas. Then once I graduated and started into the field of AAC, working at the school in Iowa, up in the northwest corner of Iowa, 3 people that I became aligned with who became really valuable mentors for me, because the world of AAC was pretty small, and we tried to connect with each other. I went up to Sheila Stewart up in Sioux Falls. I went across the state over to Beverly Vicker at Iowa City, and I went down a couple hours to Faith Carlson in Omaha, Nebraska. And it was these 3 women that also shaped what I was doing and implementing these vocabulary extension strategies. And finally, a fifth mentor was Shirley McNaughton up in Toronto. I became familiar with using and started using more and more Bliss symbolics. And it was Shirley that helped me really systematically implement more strategies, which we were calling, again, vocabulary extension strategies. And all of my teachers, all of these early mentors in my field said you should base vocabulary, or should base AAC intervention on 4 principles. Core vocabulary. So when, our field kind of lost track for a while in focusing on core vocabulary, but it was always a part of my training that we had to have those frequently used words, What we needed to do with our kids, no matter what level they were, is work on putting those words together, making sure we had words from all these different word groups. And when possible, if you had room on your manual board, you could start even having kids adding word endings. The first word ending we always put on a board was plural S, so that kids can talk about more than one. And then in the verb tenses, we put past tense as our first verb tense, because it needed to be able to differentiate. Is it now, or are you talking about something in the past? But the fourth principle was use these vocabulary extension strategies as a key and necessary strategic skill. Janice Light in our field way back in the 80s wrote about the strategic skills as one of the 4 areas of competency for good AAC users. You have to be good with their device, operational competency, linguistic competency, social competencies, and strategic. So when we think about descriptive teaching or descriptive talking or descriptive testing, the early roots of all that go back to a manual communication board, because again, on a manual board, that space was very limited for where you could put vocabulary. So you had to find ways to give kids access to more words. Now, some of these early vocabulary strategies, which I find I'm still using today, these strategies were used to arrive at a concept when that concept was not represented in the person's external pre-stored vocabulary. And that comes right from the definition of the rules of Bliss symbolics. So the early strategies I learned to use was to add some additional symbols on the child's board. These are special symbols, so that if the child had the picture of the word letter on their board, a letter, not a core word, but they've got a picture of letter on there. Or they could have even just pointed to a letter and says same as or same sound as letter. So if the child pointed to belongs to letter, could be a stamp, same as letter, could be a postcard, sounds the same as male or man, could be male, opposite of. You had the word get, you said opposite of get. If I don't get it, maybe I give it, I send it. Yeah, send. Like a letter plus computer could be email. Part of a computer starts with M, could be mouse. And so we systematically provided these types of symbols on a kid's manual board and taught them how to use them strategically. Generally used mostly for extended vocabulary, because we tried to give them as much robust core as we could. We knew on manual board we could give them all the many symbols they needed for all that possible extended vocabulary. So the roots of this go back a long way back in December of 1988, and this has long since been out of print. I was privileged to be part of a project through the American Speech Language Hearing Association, where we looked at what were different implementation strategies to support students in classrooms. And I was asked to write an article on how to describe how to do these vocabulary extension strategies. Now, again, it's out of print, but I think there's some good bits in this yet, because I wrote about how do you actually teach these various strategies. So I put that old article in your resource folder. So take a look at it if you think it could be valuable. Now, as we entered the world of speech generating devices, the person who I think needs to get the credit for using the term descriptive teaching is Bruce Baker. He's the first person that I know from within my life experience with him, as well as in a written form. He gave a name to what we were doing in the world of speech generating devices. He looked at a lot of these strategies, and he started talking to us about not only that we were doing it for a practical, strategic reason, but he saw other educational linguistic value to what we were doing, and reminded us that even when we were using speech generating devices, which now we're not limited in space. You know, if theoretically, if I wanted to add every word that a child might need in their academic career for reading classes, social studies, science, math, geography, you know, history, I could get it all in there. I have yet to ever add vocabulary to a kid's AAC device and the device tell me, sorry, memory's full. I haven't gotten to that point ever, because we have a lot of space to add all this vocabulary. So descriptive teaching was, as we go through this, it's a strategy, it's a strategic skill that we want to use, not because our devices don't have enough space to have all these words in it, but we're going to talk about how is it to the kids' best educational linguistic value to learn how to find these infrequently used words for a lesson that might be done in a week? Or is there something else we should be doing to continue to help our kids learn to talk as well as talk to learn? So Bruce Baker is a linguist and a theorist. He's not a speech language pathologist, but he has been a longtime advocate for core vocabulary and generative language. So I've got to give him credit for shaping a lot of my thinking of how I shifted from using vocabulary extension strategies into using descriptive teaching. Now, sometimes I switch between calling it descriptive talking. Sometimes you're going to hear me say descriptive teaching. Sometimes you're going to hear me say descriptive testing. They are, you know, they're interconnected things. They're not separate from each other, but I do want to differentiate what I mean between each of those things. Now, in descriptive talking, there's both a communication partner component to this, as well as an AAC user or a person who uses AAC. That's what my acronym is there, the PWUAAC, a person who uses AAC. I recently on Facebook saw a parent post a video where she was showing her son using an AAC system. He was young, and he was asking for girl in pink in monster movie. He wanted the name added to his device of a girl wear pink dress monster movie, something like that. He had strung together 4 words to describe a word that he wanted to be able to say that he didn't have in his device. This kid was naturally embracing descriptive talking. He's describing. Think of it as what we all do when we can't think of a certain word. We do circumlocution. And I always find the word I wanted to find, but I can generally describe it. I can give a synonym. I know my mother experienced a lot of cognitive decline after a traumatic brain injury. And we all have probably people in our life, an experience of our parents or somebody we knew in our life, a grandparent who had this kind of word finding problems, but they can tell you, oh, I used it outside. You know, I bought it when I was in Florida. Oh, it goes in the ocean. You know, they can describe a surfboard. They just couldn't come up with the word. So it's something all AAC users do it. It is a life skill, a strategic skill. They all do. That's, I call just descriptive talking. They're just doing it. And then we as communication partners, we do it with our kids. Sometimes we're doing it intentionally because we're modeling how to describe a word that we know is not in the device. But many times we do it because we, as well as the kid, don't know where the word is in the device. I've seen many a parent say, oh, I don't know how to find the word. I can't come up with it. Of course, I have a word problem right now. I can't come up with the word TV. I don't know where it is in the device, but I can say the thing we watch fun at night. Oh, the thing we watch for fun at night. Oh, it's the TV. All right, we all do it. So that's just descriptive talking. There's no expectations. There's no specific strategies we're implementing. We just do it. So if you're modeling descriptive talking with a kid on the device with no expectation that they repeat what you do, what you just did. You didn't say, okay, I just modeled 4 words of how to say TV. Now you do it. No, you're just modeling it. They just do it. Now, when we get to descriptive teaching and descriptive testing, this is where things become more done strategically. It's just not part of our natural interaction. This is now done systematically for an educational purpose and for a strategic purpose. So you might have the teacher or the paraprofessional or any other communication partner is going to systematically use descriptive language in a lesson. So rather than saying, I'm going to add in all those words that we need for a specific lesson, I'm instead going to use descriptive talking or descriptive language in my lesson. And as the teacher, I'm going to systematically teach my AAC users how to talk back to me with these kinds of descriptive strategies. Then in descriptive testing, descriptive testing is that one time where we do want kids to repeat back some or all of what we just modeled as the answer. We want them to repeat, just like we want any other speaking child in the class. If we've just described, something about the clouds, we're having a science class about the weather, and we're talking about different kinds of clouds, and you have big clouds and long clouds, and you've described clouds that way, you say to the kids, how do you describe a cumulus cloud? Tell me something about it. You ask the kid to give back what you just modeled. This is the one time when what you model, you want the kid to repeat back, because you want to both understand that the kid has been listening to what you've taught, they're processing the information you've taught them, and they can give that information back to you. I'll just give a little story on Joshua here. People weren't asking him to repeat back what was going on in the classroom lesson. They got so nervous about, oh, we shouldn't ask him to repeat what we've modeled. And what we saw starting to happen with Joshua is he stopped listening. And at one point when I was in the classroom watching, and I saw the teacher was doing something and the paraprofessional was modeling, I could see by looking at Joshua, he was in another world. And when I asked him, Joshua, you need to be listening to what the teacher is saying and listening to what Miss Marie is modeling for you. And his response, he went to his device on his eye gaze and says, no, her job, and looked at the paraprofessional like, oh no, Joshua, it is not the job of your paraprofessional to listen to the lesson. It is your job as well. So we want to keep that kid engaged. And we do want them to test what they've heard. Now, not necessarily formalized testing, but just to kind of those little quick check-ins. Have you paid attention? All right, I'm going to show you 3 videos. They are at my YouTube channel. These are not children. These are adults. I can't typically get permission from classrooms and schools to video in the classroom, but these 2 adults are more than happy for me to video them. So I'm going to show you these 3 videos. They're very short, about the basic steps on descriptive teaching. Descriptive talking, descriptive teaching, descriptive testing. So I've identified, we're doing a lesson on emergency preparation. In the state of Florida, every year, adults with disabilities have to go through some sort of little review lesson about what we do in emergencies, because we get hurricanes and all sorts of other things that we have to figure out emergency preparation. So that's the lesson, emergency preparation. And so my target word I'm targeting is the word emergency. Nothing wrong with learning it, but I'm not necessarily putting that word in their device, well, at least not now. They may decide at some point in their life they want the word emergency in there. It's a good word to have. But I'm not worrying about adding it into their device right now. All right, let's play this.
Today we're doing a lesson on emergency preparation. And so part of our lesson, we have to talk about what does it mean to have an emergency, and what does it mean for something when we have preparation. Okay, emergency preparation.
Now you can see in that little clip there that I have really detailed lesson plans. No, not really. I've got my dry erase board. I know what I'm going to be talking about. I've identified the target vocabulary, and you can see there also my wall chart. I've got my wall chart there at what I'm going to use in the lesson. It's got the vocabulary on it with whatever symbols the boys have to select to do that, to do the lesson. But I have identified what my language curriculum goal is to learn about what emergencies are and what it means for preparation. So we've identified the vocabulary, and then I'm going to do the teaching bit of it with some little bit of making sure the boys are understanding what I'm talking about. But I have on my chart, I have pre-circled. I've pre-circled some words on my chart. And my charts have evolved over the years. The chart you're going to see later in the PowerPoint doesn't look exactly like this, because each time a teacher said, well, it would be a lot easier for me if you formatted it this way or that way. So I kept evolving them. But this hung up in the speech therapy room all the time. When I wasn't there, these guys would come in there and look at it and practice stuff. But it's organized with yellow people words, green verbs, blue adjectives, purple prepositions, orange nouns, and all the different parts of speech are on there. And I've pre-circled some words with a dry erase pen so that I can find them quickly with my eye while I'm doing the lesson. So
I think we have to think about an emergency. An emergency is a bad thing. Yep. Generally, emergencies are bad things, not good things.
Now I went off script. I had circled bad things. And one of the reasons I liked the wall chart, rather than having made in advance of this lesson, let's say a set of cards that said, here's my definition of an emergency, it's a bad thing. Well, we know teachers always go off script, and students go off script, and you get a better idea. That's why I like my wall chart, that I've got flexibility. But I could tell I went off chart because my finger's coasting along, looking for the word good, because I hadn't pre-circled it. But I always show that video to teachers to say, you're going to plan in advance for a lesson, but you will always go off script. That's okay. We all do. That's what good teachers do. I've gone off script, but I can find the words on that board and still use that tool to help the students say the words in their devices.
All right, so the first thing we have to know about an emergency is usually they are bad things. Second thing about emergency.
All right, and we heard John repeat that back. The guys have done lessons with me frequently, and so they know Miss Gail's going to ask me, what do you know about an emergency? Bad thing. That's a bad thing. If he had said not good thing, I'd have been happy with that too. But he's listening, he can repeat it back, so I know he's attending in the lesson. And I'm going to give him a second thing.
Is that they do not happen every day. Hopefully.
All right, so I will have gone through what are our definitions of an emergency. Bad things, not good things. They don't happen every day. One of the guys said they surprise. Yes, emergencies are generally a surprise. We don't have on our iCal, I'm planning for an emergency to happen at 11:45. No. So we could go through and talk about what else do you know about an emergency, kind of activating their prior knowledge. So we're going through the basic principles of the lesson without really needing to say the word emergency or the word preparation. You're fundamentally dealing with the concepts of the lesson, which is what you want to do in good teaching. Then we review and test.
What's the second thing we know about an emergency?
Bad things do not happen every day.
All right, they're bad things, and they do not happen every day. Hurricanes. Which group would they fall into? We know they're coming, or we do not know they're coming? Mr. Cole?
Now, I would just make a comment, but do we not know they're coming? Man, I'm going whack, 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 whack on that board. If I was critiquing my ability to do good modeling, I would give myself an F. That was too fast. It was, nobody could see what I was pointing at, but I was sloppy because I know these guys know the vocabulary, but I was sloppy. That's not a good example of modeling.
Don't tell me we're dragons. That's right.
So we know when hurricanes are coming. So we go through all of that. So that just gives you an overview, a big picture. You can look at them again. You can share those videos as you're doing this with other teachers because they're all at my YouTube channel. So you can use them in any trainings you do. I'm giving you my verbal permission. Go ahead and use them, and you can critique me as much as you like and say, Gail would say her modeling there got her an F. The power. So let's talk about the power of descriptive teaching. We are doing this, partly as a strategy to cope with things in the classroom, but it goes deeper than that. It's an essential life skill because no person using the AAC system, if they are not spellers, okay, once you become a speller, the world of all possible words opens up to you, obviously. But when you're not a speller or you have very limited spelling skills, you are always dependent on getting those words pre-stored into your device, and you're never going to have enough of them. You just never are. No adult that I work with has every possible word in there that they need. And if they didn't become spellers, they have become strategic descriptive talkers. So some of the examples I've written below here are from my AAC using adolescents and adults. So when one day Jonathan said to me, team, team, team. So he stopped at his machine and picked team 3 times. Then he said weekend fun. So when a kid starts talking with you with descriptive talking, he's just naturally descriptive talking. You now have to put on your explorer hat and figure out what is he saying to you. So I have to first off say, Jonathan, did you mean to stop at team 3 times? He says, yes. All right, so a bunch of teams, okay? And then he gave me some time, weekend fun. And that's about all he could give me. So I have to think when a bunch of teams are together, it's on a weekend and it's fun because he's not building a sentence. He's given me a definition. That's kind of what descriptive talking is. It's a definition. And so team, 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 weekend fun turned out to be tournament because he was talking about something they had done over the weekend and there was a baseball tournament. And then another time I came over to his house, he gave me 3 little phrases. Over water, that's a phrase. Go up, fast, cold, loud. So he's descriptively talking about his experience of over water, go up, fast, cold, loud. I did not get this one. I had to go talk to the family and say to his brother, what is he talking about? I have no clue. And he said, oh, we went to St. Pete Beach over the weekend. We went parasailing over the water. He got that experience of being pulled, and then it all made sense. He had it in the perfect order. Over water, when they pull you off that platform and you go up, and it was fast up there, cold up there, loud up there. So yeah, I think it's pretty good descriptive talking for parasailing. And then the last one is from an adult with some significant cognitive disabilities using an eye gaze system to a manual board, not even on a device. And she said green or drink green Taco Bell, because I had asked her, next week when I come, what fun thing would you like to do? Because we did a lot of activity-based instruction. Sometimes we would do a reading, sometimes we would cook, sometimes we would do an art project, sometimes, you know, we just did all sorts of activities, but she always got the chance. She could choose what she wanted to do. So this is in that context where she says, drink green Taco Bell. So I'm like thinking, okay, do you want to go to Taco Bell? Do you want me to stop at Taco Bell and get you, what, limeade or something? And she's like, no, 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 no. But something she wants with drinking. And then she added fall down. And it's like, fall down. And Taco Bell means Mexican. Green drink. I said, are you talking about margaritas? Ah, she got so excited. She wants to make margaritas. How she knows about margaritas, I don't know. And we will make, you know, virgin margaritas in therapy the next week with bring my blender, you know, the icy margarita version. Sure, we can do that. But that was her concept. So what gets to the heart of this, why it's an essential life skill, is to communicate so many things that we can't even begin to predict are part of their lives. But you also get a glimpse in their life experience, in their understanding of a concept, which is why this becomes so important as a principle to apply within a classroom, because this is what real learning is about. So as an academic skill, the power of descriptive teaching is that when we're talking with kids of any age, any ability, we're teaching them to talk descriptively, because it becomes so critical as the vocabulary of the curriculum becomes more and more sophisticated with more and more vocabulary words that are either not in the speech generating device or not understood by the student because they've never experienced those words, never explored those words, never said those words. Joshua, we really discovered this when he got into middle school, high school, that how he struggled in the curriculum was because the words in his device were core vocabulary words and he's mastered them, but they aren't terribly sophisticated words. When he got to words like the boy and the girl were ecstatic, he didn't know what ecstatic meant. He didn't know. He'd never heard it before. He never said that word. He didn't grasp that it meant very, very happy. Or, you know, there's just so many words came up that were going to impede their ability to participate in the academics. And you don't have to be in middle school or high school for those to come up. We're going to see an example I'm going to give you in first grade. First grade lesson in a science class on plants have the word support, which I can tell you in the AAC system, not in the pre-stored vocabulary. And I would not say it's even lesson specific. You know, we talk about his supports on his chair. We talk about, you know, having better support in the classroom. This is not a word that's unique to this lesson. That's what I mean by not lesson specific. Neither is the word absorb. Although plants will absorb light from the sun, you know, we're going to run lotion on our hands and wait for it to absorb into our skin. And you are absorbing ideas that I'm sharing with you. Again, not lesson specific. Nutrient, you know, is probably a little bit more lesson specific because as plants take in the nutrients, but you can make an argument clearly that even the word nutrient is not lesson specific. All right, so that's some examples there, but I'm going to take us back a big step. We're going to take a big step back because you might be going, oh, well, I work with kids who are emerging communicators, so I guess this next hour doesn't apply to me. No, you can start laying the foundation of descriptive teaching and start doing descriptive teaching even with individuals, with AAC users who are emerging communicators. And emerging communicators are still those kids that need a lot of support. They have a very, very simple beginning language. They are not able to necessarily even access an AAC system independently. This is some of our field's definition of emerging. And I'm going to show you how we could start doing descriptive teaching as a strategy when we label the environment descriptively, because environmental labeling is something we frequently do in practice in classrooms, sometimes in parents' homes. We make choices, choice making, a big thing with descriptive, a big task we do with emerging communicators. We can do descriptive teaching with choice making, and we can do it in activity-based instruction to describe and direct action. So let me show you what I mean by that. Now this is a photo that's quite old because the TV shows how very old this photo is. In our current practice of labeling environments, and this is out of somebody's home, the family would have labeled that TV with the picture of TV on it. You know, in your classrooms, you may see in the special education programs, they've gone around the classroom and they put a label of the door on the door. They put a label of desk on the desk, and they have a little kitchen in their special education program, and they've labeled, you know, the oven, the microwave, you know, the stove. Everything's been labeled with a picture of that thing, which I've often wondered about, like, how is that picture being used? Somehow it's being used so that the kid's getting the association. That picture on my board is this thing. But you really don't need to point at that picture when you're standing in front of the TV to say you want to turn on the TV, because you're standing right there, and every AAC user will generally just point or look at the TV because it's right there. Now, as we get past just thinking about what the thing is, descriptive teaching, descriptive talking starts much more as obviously describing it by a characteristic of it or what we do with it. And so that's a good way to start bringing descriptive teaching into a classroom with kids with emerging communicators. You start talking about what you do with it. And here in this family's home, we put on simple 2-word labels to describe what you do with it. You watch it, you turn it on, you turn it off. So we're taking a step beyond just labeling, taking a step beyond talking about it just by what is its name, and taking a step past just requesting by label. Here we're starting to label objects in the environment descriptively, what we do with it. This again in somebody's home. This is the home of a young girl that had Angelman syndrome that I was supporting. And we started on a system where she just had one picture meant one picture for one word, into starting to go with some icon sequences. So she was going on to an icon sequencing system. But in their family's home, if you're familiar with some of the characteristics of kids with Angelman's, they can be disruptive. They can be very destructive. Okay, so all their materials, all her toys and games stayed in a closet. So they would describe the different things that she could play with. So we didn't try to describe every possible item. We started classifying them. So if she went to her board and say, play, or you said, what do you want to play with? And she pointed at the word hard. Then we went to all those boxy things that were hard in boxes. So once we got it narrowed down to that, then we could start asking, specifically, do you want, password or Chutes and Ladders? You want to play Candyland? If she pointed at her on her board or said with her device the word funny, then we looked at the costume. Pretty meant anything with arts and crafts. Loud was everything with music. Soft was any one of her stuffed animals. So we could start describing things that way. So we could talk about what we do with them or a characteristic of these objects. So I want you to pull out your boards or look at this slide on your handout if you've got really good vision and you can see the words. I've put together this board, and obviously I haven't used any symbols because I don't want us to be limited to thinking this only works with symbols. This transcends every symbol set out there, and I wanted to give you a pretty robust vocabulary. 300 words. And you can see on that board way off on the far lower right are some vocabulary extension strategies. So this is a backup board for a couple of the adults that I work with who have really good AAC systems, speech generating devices, but they have multiple backup systems. And this is one of their backup systems. This backup system always stays in every one of their go bags. Every person in Florida has a go bag that I've put together that if I support you, I make you a go bag. So if bad weather comes and you got to go, you grab that bag. It's got your chargers in, it's got your backup manual boards, it's got something to use with emergency personnel and anything else that the staff puts into their go bag. But there's got the same as, opposite of, same group, sounds like, part of, starts with, join words, add to add to front. So we've got all those on that board as well. All right. So using this board, this is the vocabulary you have available to you. And I'm going, even though spelling is possible for you on this board, I'm going to take spelling off the table for you. I am going to assume you cannot spell. You can read, but you can't spell. All right, so you've got your people words, your verbs, your time and adverb words. You've got your adjectives, prepositions, conjunctions, determiners, and interjections. You've got a good vocabulary. So we are going back to thinking about a special education classroom. And we're going to talk about starting to think descriptively. In my early days, teachers would say to me, well, next week we're going to do these 4 cooking activities. Could you make a manual communication board for these different activities? So could you make one for, making a cake? So I was trying to be friendly and trying to accommodate them until it got to be too much, because for every different cooking things they were doing, it was just getting to be too much. We're trying to get past not needing to invest our time in making activity-specific boards or programming in activity-specific words, and trying to get around all of that. All right. So I'm going to ask you, what core words would you use off of your board? And you're going to have to read what people type in the chat window. Describe for me with 2 or more core words, or 1 to 3 core words. What are ingredients? Generic idea of ingredients. So you're going to be looking over in the orange stuff. All right, if you don't have your board in front of you, I'm putting this back up here. What would be some way, if a student doesn't have the word ingredients on their board, which they don't, and you're saying to them, what do we need in order to cook? We're going to do some baking today of this cake. What do we need?
Paula said part, Lori said food part, Katie said food, Melanie said food part.
Okay.
Jennifer said food.
Good.
Sherry
that would all
said
work.
all, water,
in the context
part,
of what
food.
All right. All right. There's no right or wrong answer. There's no right or wrong answer. I know often a lot of people will say all things, because we got the word thing. We got the word stuff. I think stuff is on there as a, stuff and thing are often my go-to things to use. All right. So in this activity, if I was doing this as the teacher, I would have said, we got all this stuff that we're going to use to bake a cake. And I probably would have modeled, we got all this stuff. These are our ingredients. Ingredients is all the stuff we need. Can you hear yourself kind of doing that? This is all the food we need. This is the stuff we need to make this cake. And this is the first thing we're going to put in. How would we describe the cake mix? In a way that when I say to the kids later on, what should we put in the bowl first? They don't have the word cake mix. They've got to communicate to me which thing they should put in the bowl first. So I would have maybe talked through each of these ingredients. We got the cake mix. Here we have the cake mix. I'm not avoiding saying the word. The cake mix is, and I'm going to describe it.
And Julie said wet, dry.
Okay.
And Joe said put in mix.
Okay. Okay.
That's it so far. Catherine said yellow and dry.
Yellow, dry. Okay, perfect. Again, there's no wrong answer here. I probably in my routine would have said, here we have our cake mix. It's yellow and it's dry. Maybe I'm peeking in the box. Maybe I've got the box open a little bit. I'm letting them all look in there, giving them that experience. And then we're going to put in these eggs. And I might say, okay, this egg, and I put it right in the bowl. Does it go in like that? No, it doesn't go in like that. Eggs go in after we break them, and we'll put them in the bowl after we break them. And I'm modeling after break. And now we've got oil in this bottle. And how am I going to describe oil? I can't, if I use wet for water, and maybe they've got water in their device. They probably do in a drink, but I'm not going to use wet for oil because I want to use wet for water. But I know I got the word slippery on there. And again, I'm going to give kids this life experience and say, I'm going to pour a little out here in the cap. Let's all feel it. Oh, it's slippery. This is the slippery thing. So for this lesson, I'm giving them experience. I'm talking about, the characteristics of each of these things, what it feels like, what it might look like, what we do with it. Maybe oil is what we pour, or water is what we pour. All right, so we have those words to describe it. And when you don't have a good option, I've given you a very robust board, but you're probably working with some kids who maybe have 50 words or less than 50 words. There have been times when I've supported kids in these emerging classrooms where kids had personal AAC systems, whether they were manual boards or they were things like GoTalk 9s, that they didn't have a lot of vocabulary. But we created our boards that had we tried to get at least to 50 words, but we kept a wall chart, which you see here on this slide, that had even additional words. So if I was in a classroom supporting kids that had somewhere between 20 and 50 words only on a simple manual core board, I still provided to that classroom a board with close to 200 words on, because I want to keep exposing them to new vocabulary and using those symbols. And the strategy that I would have done in the making of the cake is to say, I'm going to take a symbol off of this board. And let's imagine for the cake mix, we decided to use the word dry. So I pulled the word dry off there. And that cake mix is going to go inside a clear box that's got a little Velcro tab on it. And I'm going to Velcro the word dry onto it. And then the oil or the eggs are going to go into another container. And I'm going to take the word break off the chart and put the word break on there. So as I've activity, a word that will be used to describe that object, I've given the kids a reminder of what symbol and what word is going to be used. And so it's part of laying down that strategic skill of what do you do when you don't have all the words you need. Now, when we're doing this as a teacher and you can't find any good core word, you've naturally said, you look strategically. What's an attribute of it? What's an action? Maybe even do a sounds like, or with some kids, you do a first letter or first sound. If there's some emerging, they've got some literacy skills. But I see many times in classrooms with kids with emerging skills, we have situational options, which for me, it means in this situation, maybe I picked a very generic word like this or that. This or that in this situation. If I didn't have the word slippery on my board for the oil, I might have put the oil in the container and put the word that on there so that I know while I'm cooking right now with you and I say, what do you want to put in? Johnny, it's your turn to put something into the mixing bowl. Tell me what you want to put in. and he points on his board to the word that, then I know he's saying the oil. So it's used for that specific time. It helps us remember how did we describe that thing, and also putting things inside of little containers. For some of my grabbier kids, it kept them from just grabbing the stuff. You know, it kind of contained their enthusiasm a little bit. So you can do a lot of these strategies with kids with emerging communication skills, reminding ourselves that you don't get hung up on the word to describe it. You say, this is just temporary. For right now, we're using the word that to stand for the oil because there was nothing else I could come up with. It's good for this activity, but tomorrow if we cook, and this time we're making pizza, and we got to rub a little oil on the crust so it doesn't get burned, maybe the kid will remember and say the word that. But we're not saying, well, what word did you use yesterday? You better use the same one. No, you're not required to use the same one. Maybe tomorrow you don't have any other wet thing, so you can use wet to describe oil. It's all being done to demonstrate a very important strategic skill and get kids to start using their words in different contexts, in different activities. It's part of what we know in our field of speech language pathology as decontextualization and generalization, which is a good thing. All right, so teaching AAC users to talk descriptively. I've laid pretty heavily on your modeling descriptive talking, but you also need to systematically and explicitly teach some strategies. Some of the things that you model, kids will get it and they'll just kind of run with it. But many other times you're just going to have to really teach it to them. And this is where, again, my wall chart comes in. I do have wall charts at my Teachers Pay Teachers store, at which I disclose in my ASHA disclosure. And you can take a look at them. You can get one. You can make your own. But on my wall charts, I do always make sure I add in some of those vocabulary versatility, descriptive teaching strategies, so I can start modeling it for students as well as they could use them as well. All right. All right, so as I'm doing this with students, and I can see that they're struggling to explain something to me, because it's going to be the rare kid who can give you 2, 3, 4 ideas to describe something. And I'm going to show you a video of a student that I'm doing this with. But I do, as you saw me with Joshua, early on when he was talking about horseback riding, I've got my cards that are different colors that coordinate with the colors on this chart. So you coordinate your cards with whatever colors you're using. I'm coordinating my colors with my chart. So I'm starting to prompt them, give me a green verb. Maybe give me an attribute. That would be a blue word. Give me a who idea. You know, that would be those yellow words. So when Jonathan said to me, team, 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 I would have written that on those yellow cards. When he said weekend, I would have written that on a light blue card, because it's a kind of an adverb in my thinking. When he said over water, I would have put that on a purple place card, or Taco Bell was a place card. I want kids to start being able to give me words from a lot of different categories, and I'm going to have to prompt them that. Tell me something about it. What does it look like? What does it feel like? If you have a wall chart or your system is organized in such a way that you can prompt the kid to say, look in the folder of place words, or look in the folder of describer words for a word in your system. So the easiest ones for kids to give you are action and person. But you start systematically doing this, not just verbally, but give them some visual anchors to hang on to. So use whatever organizational strategies are part of the AAC system that you're using, and use extra visual supports that allow you to record the kids' ideas. So you're prompting them. You're systematically doing this. Many times kids are going to try to tell you something even that happened in their day. You're not even involved in a lesson. And you'll go to this strategy to say, well, tell me who was involved. Tell me where you were. Tell me what other people were there. And you're trying to get all that extra information out. So you're laying a lot of foundation for not only talking in the classroom during the lesson, but having conversation and discourse outside of classroom settings. This is another different program organizer I did. This is one I did with Joshua. This was Joshua's ones as he got into later elementary school and more into the classroom. The classroom teacher and his paraprofessional had copies of this organizer. It's a visual organizer. I mean, teachers grasp this idea because they love all sorts of organizers for ideas. And so when I gave this to a teacher to say, this would be a way for you to pull out of Joshua other information that he might have learned from the lesson. So use one of these organizers and have him give you an action idea that he remembers or an attribute. And the little symbols underneath there coordinate with what works in Joshua's program. So he can, relate to that. So you have to make your symbol, you have to make your program organizer specific to whatever AAC system your person is using, because this is unique to either LAMP or the Unity program. So I'm going to show you a video of Jonah. And Jonah is, at this point, he is high school, late high school. I didn't start working with him till he was 15. And while this isn't specific to doing a classroom lesson, I think it's a nice video that he's using an alert message. Jonathan, Jonah, Joshua, the other boy, Jordan. I got all these boys I work with whose names start with the letter J. Because they are good strategic communicators, I added to their device pre-stored sentences. Because communication partners, when Jonathan is saying something like team, 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 weekend fun, they don't realize he's not making a sentence. They're going to try to put that in a grammatical order, but he's not making a sentence. He's giving a definition. So all of these kids who, as they start becoming better at this, even Jordan's got this in his, we start teaching them how to be strategic with the person they're talking to. If it's a stranger, somebody they don't work with very often, or even a classroom teacher or the paraprofessional, you got to let them know that I'm putting words together to describe something, not build a sentence. So I've added things. I gave you some examples of what could be some alert messages. So before you start talking, I teach them, give them this message. What I want to say isn't in my device. I'll be putting words together to describe it. Or give them some repair messages, give them some situational or linguistic hints. Jonah, who you're going to see in this video, is often in conversations that are going on around him. He's often 10 minutes behind the conversation. Conversation with speaking people change topics very, very quickly. So he's got stuff like, it's about something you were talking about before. So we got to kind of go back into our short-term memory and try to recall what we were talking about 10 minutes ago. And he's also learning about metaphors and idioms, but that's for another day. So let's look here at Jonah. Here's an adult who's using an alert message as part of his descriptive talking strategies. I ask him to tell me something about his weekend when his brother visited. He says, party, celebration, me. I know he has a birthday coming up in 3 weeks, so I confirm that he is making a sentence, and he says yes, and the topic is his upcoming birthday. So I ask him to tell me something about the birthday party being planned.
Repair. Spell.
And we're working virtually.
Not meant. Can't say. Talking about before. Don't know.
He's an auditory scanner, obviously.
Give hint. Start over. Yes, no. It's a metaphor or idiom. Different question. Not in device.
What I want to say is in my device.
All right, well, that's wonderful that you give me that hint, that what you want to say is not in your device. So that means you've got to use one of your other strategies. He says, same as plus dance. I confirm that he is giving a definition of the new word. He says yes, and ask him to keep going.
Here.
Then he says, part of word and discuss. I break down this word into its parts. Disc, cuss. And he wants disc. That's enough for me to figure out dance plus disc equals disco. Now I know they are planning a disco party for his 21st birthday.
All right, so obviously I misspoke. It's planning for his 21st birthday. So that's a little bit of an example with Jonah. All right. Let's talk about the difference, what's going on in the classroom. As we start talking about bringing this into the classroom, we have to recognize, strategies that teachers already are implementing as part of their teaching routine. And teachers generally switch back and forth with all students. They're already doing descriptive teaching. They're just not doing it necessarily with the kid using an AAC system. All teachers go back and forth between descriptive and referential teaching. And again, these are terms that were first coined by Bruce Baker. So we need to identify these different teaching styles. They all go back and forth between them. And at sometimes descriptive teaching is the way we need to go. Other times referential teaching is the appropriate strategy to go with. So there's not a one is good and the other is bad. There's a plus and minus, and all teachers all day long are juggling between referential and descriptive teaching. So I'm going to give the example of the running of the Iditarod, a lesson that came in this curriculum textbook. And most of our curriculum, if we're using a textbook, whether it's a standard gen ed curriculum or even a special education curriculum, generally there are some key vocabulary words that are identified as part of this lesson. And so we've got the words blizzards, checkpoints, courageous, experience, musher, and rugged. And when I did this lesson with Joshua when he was in elementary school, I was fairly confident. Not only did I knew for a certainty none of these words were pre-stored in his device, and that he had no idea whatsoever of what any of these words meant, even the words like courageous. I wasn't confident he could give me a definition of what that word meant. So in the referential teaching style, this is where teachers are doing a lot of probing of the recall of facts. They've delivered the facts about the lesson to the students, and then they want to be able to get a quick one-word answer back from the student and be able to clearly mark it off. Did they get it right or did they get it wrong? So this happens a lot in the classroom where they're going to ask the question, who drives the sled? And those speaking students can easily say musher. Where they ask, what do we call the race? The speaking kids, if they were paying attention, can easily respond and say the word Iditarod, because all of that information, all of those facts are new to the students, are new to those speaking kids. But when you take that strategy and apply it to a kid who uses an AAC system, and you're sitting around with your speaking peers and you ask the class, what do we call the person who drives the dog sled? That kid using the AAC system might say in her head, I know it's called the musher, but I can't spell it, and it's not pre-stored in my device. So they're kind of stuck. They're stuck without being able to give an answer, and they become passive listeners in a class and not active participants. Now, can a teacher still ask referential questions? Yeah, of the speaking kids, because they can easily regurgitate back that information. But the kid using the AAC's system is going to need a different strategy. When we've all been on the road of referential teaching, I used to try to help my teachers who wanted all those lessons, and they would hand me maybe on Friday the words that were going to be part of the social studies lessons next week on the Iditarod. Especially in Gen Ed, these words change very quickly. So the teacher knew what words she thought she needed and gave them to me. Then I had to find the appropriate pictures to represent those words. And quite often, I might have had to go onto the internet to try to find that picture, harvest it off the internet, put it on a flash drive, get that flash drive put into the kid's speech generating device, get that picture uploaded into the device, get all this vocabulary programmed in, adding more and more and more vocabulary. And then, you know, they were going to do the lesson. Let's say they were going to do the lesson on Wednesday. I better have some time to get all that work done on Monday, Tuesday, maybe try to, kids, it comes to speech therapy, better show them that kid where it is in the device. In general education, it's impossible to keep up with this. It's absolutely impossible. I have no husband, no children, no pets, no living plants. I do nothing but this, and I couldn't keep up with it. And I had a caseload of only about 10, 12 kids. I didn't have a massive caseload. I couldn't keep up with it. What I did to accommodate this is kids sort of knew, and Miss Gail she's going to create a page with answers for my next lesson. And if I knew there were going to be 5 questions asked for this kid using the AAC system, I gave the 5 answers in a row from left to right, the answers. First answer, there's in the first key. Second answer is in the second key. Just in the order they were going to have to give the answers, I put them across the row. And I knew in my heart what I was doing was terrible. It was what I started feeling was regurgitation education. I was teaching my kids how to regurgitate out of their device some facts. And I knew they hadn't learned a thing. And I had to change my ways. I was trying to get the teacher to use the device more in the classroom, and it really wasn't coming. It wasn't resulting in that. It really didn't result in what I was hoping was the goal. The kid gave a couple answers and then was not engaged in the rest of the lesson. And I had to change my ways because the costs of this was a lot of effort on my part with a revolving door. Time spent was in words. I put the word Iditarod in, and I guarantee you after that lesson was done, that was never ever used again. And now I'm getting a device filled up with a lot of junk in it that I got to continually figure out, do we keep or do we purge? With all that time being misdirected into vocabulary that was specific to lessons, rather than doing what I needed to do as a speech pathologist, is promoting language and helping the teacher promote the language production and true participation of their student. So the good news is a switching over to descriptive teaching solves 90% of these issues. And with descriptive teaching, teachers are already doing it. They already ask questions of their speaking students that probe for what did the kids understand? What could they apply from this lesson? What's their opinion about it? This is already part of what they ask. They'll ask a question, well, would you like to be a musher someday? You know, what do you think it's like to be a musher? You know, have you ever spent all day out in the snow in Florida? What do you think that would be like? They already do this with the speaking kids. And what that comes from the speaking kids is kids give more than one word answers, where they can talk about, they can give their opinions and put together 2 or 3 or 4 words. There's no one exact answer. You're really figuring out, what did the kid learn? And when people say to me, this kid just keeps only talking with one word, and I go and observe in the class and say, that's because you're stuck on referential teaching. Everything you're teaching this kid in the classroom is, I'll ask you a question that can be answered with one word. Therefore, I'm going to keep plowing deeply in this row of one-word answers, one-word talking. We have to get out of that. We have to get out of that trench of one-word answers, and descriptive teaching and descriptive talking is a way to do it. So in that, we say to that teacher now, you can ask those referential questions. There's nothing wrong with asking Johnny, who's sitting on the floor, and Susie, who's sitting on the floor by you, you know, what do we call that guy who drives the sled? You know, he's called the musher. But when you turn to Susie, who's sitting there with her device, I want you to ask her specifically a descriptive question. Like, what does a musher do? Do you remember in our conversation? And I modeled, what did the musher do? And now she can go to her words she already has in her device to give you an answer that reflects, what did she actually learn in this lesson? So the language benefits of descriptive teaching and talking and testing is, you're using a stable vocabulary. So those words that you're going to use day after day after day after day are the words that are already in the device, and you can start putting those words together in lots of different contexts with different combinations, which is addressing the kinds of things that we want to do as speech pathologists. And I'm just thinking back to some of our questions. What could be an IEP goal? An IEP goal could be, when Susie gives an answer in class, she will put together 2 words, or she will do when asked a question in class about where something is located, she will use a preposition with another kind of word. I mean, you could start saying, how could this, using the language of descriptive teaching, how could that possibly, as a speech pathologist, help me drive my IEP goals? When asked to describe something in class, she will give it an adjective and a verb. That could be a potential goal. Or a teacher's IEP goal, she will give me 2 ideas of a new, when she talks about a new lesson concept, she'll give me 2 ideas related to a new vocabulary word. So this could translate into IEP goals. So we got some language benefits. Educational benefits are robust. The first one I want to touch upon is an educational theory called constructivism. And in constructivism, the theory of constructivism is, we all learn something new by building upon the foundation of something we already know. And so the foundation of new learning, of the foundation that I want us to have really strong in our kids, is their core vocabulary. That should be their foundational skills. So when I'm learning something new, like the concept of what it means to be caught in a blizzard, I'm not thinking about, where did Miss Gail put the word blizzard in my device? No, I can be thinking, oh, blizzard. I know how to say cold. I know how to say white. I know how to say these other words that somehow help me understand what being in a blizzard could be. When I first learned about constructivism, I drew it back to an experience I had when I was first learning how to develop film. I'm kind of a lover of photography. And of course, now everything's digital photography. But in the late 70s, early 80s, I used real film and cameras, and I developed it. And I remember my first class I went to, where the guy was teaching us how we actually develop film. And as he talked through, You know, first you put it in this solution, and then it goes into this solution, and you got to do it in the dark and all these things. I immediately was taken back, not only by the step-by-step process, but even the smell reminded me when my mother gave me a home permanent. This was something I had previous learning about. You know, first she put this one solution on my hair, and then that made it get curly, and then she had to put this other solution on it called the neutralizer to stop it from burning my hair off. And I could relate immediately to the steps of developing film because I had a foundation of previous learning. That's the theory of constructivism, and I think it applies to kids using AAC system if that foundation of learning is their core vocabulary. The next thing is Bloom's taxonomy of learning. And in Bloom's taxonomy of learning, which we're going to look at things this afternoon about how can we have increased complexity of learning. In Bloom's taxonomy of learning, we know the kinds of questions and the kinds of learning tasks we do with kids progressively make them think more. And if we keep at the level of just saying, what's the name of the guy who drives the sled, we're at just the recall level, the recognition memory level. But when we start talking about what do you think it would be like to be a musher, that's taking a higher level of thinking. And you don't have to be mainstream gen ed, normal cognitive skills to be able to do that. We can get our kids with significant cognitive delays also getting past just the recall level. And then the educational benefit, if we go back and look at what your educational standards say. Many of my standards in the state of Florida tell me kids have to define, describe, discuss, compare, contrast, explain. Very few of my state standards actually have to say they have to name. They don't have to name. And we'll look at an example of the parts, a science lesson on the parts of the plant. There are very few goals that say they just have to name the planets, name the parts of a plant, name the kinds of social structures in an economy, an economics lesson. No, they talk about you have to define it, describe it. So the educational benefits of descriptive teaching means we're bumping kids up to thinking a little bit deeper. Which when you get into life and you've got to be able to figure out what's going on with my attendant care, I have to figure out how to live independently in the world. Being able to have those little bit more thinking skills is a huge benefit. There's a staff benefit. One of my instructional assistants, Lucy, and Cynthia, the teacher, before we embraced descriptive teaching as a team, Lucy didn't know what was in the device or how to say it. By giving her the wall chart, helping her model by look at the pictures on the wall chart and find those pictures on this main display. She now knows what's in the machine and how to say it. She feels more competent. A more competent feeling person is going to do a better job. And Cynthia, I think Cynthia's comment was the richest one. That she confessed before, I really didn't know what Joshua was learning because we were doing regurgitation education. And now she knows what he knows. Work with him. So I think there are some major staff benefits. You can do descriptive talking when kids have low-tech boards. Some of them are going to have a limited amount of information, but as I mentioned when we were doing our little activity on making a cake, you might have to supplement a personal communication board a kid has with a wall chart that has more vocabulary. And then you can start using the words on that wall chart as a means to grow their vocabulary and then start adding those new words to the kids' personal core words. So we're always wanting to how can we keep growing the vocabulary? Kids, when they have speech generating devices, none of that vocabulary is available at a glance. If you're going to do descriptive teaching and talking with teachers, and you have to give them a wall chart. They don't know what's in that device. They're not confident and they don't have the time to spend a week learning it all. especially those general education teachers. Maybe a special education teacher wants to invest more time in learning what's in the device, but it's really good to have that wall chart because it keeps us focused on the words we want to learn. My wall charts don't have every possible word that's in the device, but the wall chart shows the words you need. You have to learn to talk with those words so you can talk to learn with those words. So let's go back to that little mantra. So if we're talking about, okay, I think I got this. Now, what am I going to do with this teacher? What am I asking the teacher to do when doing that lesson? I'm asking the teacher to do 3 things. I'm asking the teacher, as you saw in my lesson with those 2 boys on emergency preparation, I'm asking that teacher to identify the lesson concepts and then teach those lesson concepts descriptively using the wall chart or modeling on the student's speech generating device. Now, in a special education classroom versus a general education classroom, the role of the instructional assistant might vary. When Joshua was going through, when Joshua was in a special education program, the teacher would often just model for him. Once he got into a general education program, his instructional assistant did all the co-modeling on the speech generating device. The teacher would model on the wall chart so that the instructional assistant knew what words to model on Joshua's speech generating device. So that's the first thing I want that teacher to do. Start thinking about the lesson concepts and how am I going to describe them with words that kids already have available to them. And then I want that teacher to ask open-ended questions or do soft probes that encourage those kids giving back those descriptive responses. Again, both right after I've modeled it, that's when we have our strongest teachable moment, but also when we're doing later some maybe formal testing, when later on we're testing what kids have learned from this lesson. But definitely when we're doing this kind of open-ended question, what have you learned? This is when we've modeled, and now a response is expected. No, just letting Joshua listen without repeating back what he just heard. And then once the kid gives you a response, I want that teacher or the paraprofessional sometimes will do it to respond to the student with what I train people to do is recast. And a recast is a term that we as speech pathologists know, where we take something that the kid had said and we maybe add something to it. We maybe correct it. We just kind of restate and repeat back in the broadest term of what a recast is. So that if one of our IEP goals is during a lesson, he will give me a 2-word utterance and he only gave me a 1-word response, then my role as the teacher or the instructional assistant is to recast what he just said as a 2-word response. So I'm giving them that increased model. So as I'm working with the teacher and I'm teaching them about descriptive teaching, I want that teacher to have an appreciation in terms. Words aren't the device. And I want that teacher to understand which words we really want to emphasize in order to encourage their vocabulary and language development. And what's on that wall chart is generally those words. Again, I'm going to say that over and over. These are the words that I know kids need to learn to say. It's the words that they have to learn to say so they can talk in class. And they're the words that I want the teachers to use. So we're always going back to understanding that we're going to collaborate so that by working on these words on this chart, I can work on what's important to me as a speech pathologist, learning this core vocabulary. But you are also having your goals met on being able to meet your educational goals. And just because I have the teacher modeling these words in their lesson, she's going to model with kind of a pray and spray. Nothing systematic about it. She's going to use whatever word she needs to do her lesson. That means I, as a speech pathologist, will not abandon explicit vocabulary and language intervention. It means she might use a smattering of adjectives, but I know when I've got that kid on one-on-one, I'm going to make sure he's learned all those adjectives. So we have our different strategies to approach teaching this bulk of core vocabulary. So I've mentioned the visual dictionary. Doesn't show all the words, but I popped this slide also in because I've got my wall chart, but kids on the move aren't always going to be sitting in front of a wall chart. So I print my wall chart very low. It prints out on 15 sheets of paper. Then I can take those 15 sheets of paper and it's formatted in such a way that I can just laminate them and take them to a place to get them put it together into a spiral binder or a ring binder, however you want to do it. So when any of those boys are on the move, whether they're outside, whether they're sitting in another part of the classroom and the wall chart's way on the other side of the room, they got their book with them. Their instructional assistant can pull that book out and have it available to them. Okay? So again, you can take a look at this. I'm just saying, I'll just point out to you that if you're making your own wall chart from scratch, which is perfectly fine, and my wall charts are based particularly on kids who are using icon sequencing. That would be the Unity program or LAMP Words for Life. If you're using a program like Prolo, Quota, Go, or Snapchat, Cora, forgive me if I got the word wrong, any other program that's page-based, where a vocabulary item is represented with one picture on a page, in order for people to find those words, you need to put the pictures for the entire navigational sequence that it takes to get there. Because if they don't know how to get to that page, they're going to have a hard time using this as a tool to translate and model then on the kids' AAC system. So you have to put the entire navigational path. So as I'm sitting with the teacher, I let them know that this wall chart has a lot of vocabulary on, but not all the words. And I'll teach them, if you need a word, I'll teach you how to look up words in the kid's device if it's not in there. And if we're thinking about a lesson that they're going to be doing, we think through, and if the words are in there and the teacher has identified some words that'll be part of her lesson in explaining the purpose and need of government, I'm not opposed to using those words if they're in there. I could say, well, this is a place, then maybe I'm going to redeem my time and do descriptive teaching somewhere else. Because we already in this program have the word government, safe, vote, pass, and laws. All right, so we're going to use this with balance. So in the prep of teaching descriptively, you go back and review your educational standards and your lesson plans and your teaching principles. So, you know, I walk through with teachers to think about what are the opportunities we're going to give them, what other accommodations might we need to use, what are our language goals, going back to our IEP goals, what's my instructional assistant going to do, and what other supports and scaffolds do I need. So this is a first grade lesson on parts of a plan. And this was something that Jordan was doing. And in the state standards in the state of Florida for this lesson plan for first graders were three things. They had to describe the different parts of a plant, they had to discuss the functions of the plant parts, and they had to explain the role of plants in our environment. Nowhere in our standards did they have to name the parts. And so the teacher's lesson plans is to plant seeds and track them. She is going to do a worksheet on the parts and functions of a plant because she can't help herself. And we're going to have to, all the kids are going to write a response to an application question. So we've reviewed our state standards. We're going to identify our lesson specific words. We'll check if those words are in the device. And if they're not in the vocabulary program already, we're going to define them. So we've identified what our key vocabulary is. We looked them up in his device, so we do know he's got a lot of already plant-related words in there. But we know from the state standards he really doesn't have to name these parts, but they're there. We're not going to avoid them, but we just know they're not where we're going to put our main emphasis. And the 4 words that are not in there, we're going to define. We're going to define what photosynthesis is and define what it means to support and to absorb and what nutrients are. So we've defined them and came up with our little visual support. Now, with his particular program, I can quickly author it. If you're supporting kids on the LAMP program or Unity program, I've got an authoring program very similar to writing with symbols. I just have to type the words and the icon sequence pop up. So it's very easy to make a quick visual support. But we've tried to create our definition based on what words we knew were on the wall chart. So I don't really have to make this additional visual support. Then looking at his standards, we have to think, what other language does he need? So we go back and say, let's look at the lesson plan. He's got to describe, discuss, and explain different things. So he's got to describe these parts of a plant and what their purposes are. So always going back to the standards. So again, I can either use the program that I use is called PASS and quickly make some additional visual support materials, or I can find my word to describe or describe the part and explain its purpose by finding things that are on my wall chart. So we're going much further beyond just naming the parts of the plant. So again, I've already mentioned, I try to avoid making extra visual support materials because it takes time, and half the time my teachers didn't use them anyway. So it really didn't reinforce me using it. But you could, if a teacher really wants additional visual supports and will use them, if this is what that teacher needs to start implementing this, give it to them. But I'd like with the wall charts, circle those words, and then again, be able to go spontaneously when things go in another direction. When I first am training a teacher, we practice. We rehearse it. We rehearse asking those kinds of open-ended questions and asking those probes and doing recasting. We need practice, and this is where teachers generally roll their eyes at me like, I'm going to feel so embarrassed. I feel so stupid doing it with you. But you need to have a little practice to do this. We all have to. And so you can look at this. I'm not going to go through this in general, in particular, what our direct questions are. Tell me about probes, reflective probes. So we go through these kinds of open language of instructions, thinking about soft probes, thinking about responding, what you do by adding something to the beginning or the end, or reordering what they said, or correcting grammatical errors. I don't get too hung up that they have to follow any procedure on recasting. I just want them to do something after the kid gave the answer. So if we're talking about planting seeds, I've been known with teachers to write out a very simple script. What do you think you're going to say? And sometimes I just record it. I just say, just teach me the lesson. Today we're going to plant some seeds. Here's a seed. We put it in the ground. We're going to watch it grow. And seeds are little, but they grow into big plants. She's teaching. And so we go back and listen to what we just said. And we start circling words on the wall chart and then say, let's talk about the probes you could ask. And then once they gives an answer and the kid said, you said, where do we put the seeds? And Jordan said, in. You can say, yes, we put it in. And you're going to model put and in. So we just practice this and we're circling things on the chart and rehearsing this. So with Jordan, this was a lesson we did with Jordan. So of course, everybody went out and planted seeds, and like every other kid, he got out there and he was going to get an opportunity, and he was going to direct other people because he's got a lot of tubes actually attached to him, and getting him out of the chair and onto a field full of dirt was not really medically a good idea for him. So he became the director of others. And our language goal was to use prepositions. So we had come up with some phrases: dig up the dirt, put in the seed, cover it up, put water on. So that was our IEP goal, was related to using prepositions in a lesson with a verb. The instructional assistant was going to model and prompt and recast. And the only visual support thing we were primarily using was his book. We didn't take the big chart out, we had the book. And if the teacher wanted, I would make her some pre-made preposition and verb cards so that he could practice those specific phrases to direct other people. So we did our planning together that way. Again, he was going to describe, all students are going to describe. Jordan's going to describe at least one part during a group activity, but each part when he's one-on-one with his paraprofessional. All students will discuss the functions of the plant parts. Again, Jordan's going to discuss one function during a group activity, but each function during one-on-one time. So he's doing the same work other kids are doing. Just we're making sure he's always got at least one opportunity in a group activity. So you can see how we've kind of thought through, how are we going to do this? What words are we going to model as we discuss the functions of the plant parts? And then he's going to do a worksheet. All kids are going to do a worksheet. And in this worksheet, we really didn't care that he had the word flower, leaves, stem, and roots in his system. But to redeem his time, we just modified a worksheet. He knows this strategy very well. This is our standard worksheet strategy with him, that the teacher will number each line and each part. And then when she says, okay,